Well, whether you are in Los Angeles or Amish country, the issue of the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, has been a topic of debate. And I think recently, almost an area of discernment, I would say, for some, as we revisit the gun laws, the rights, and these mass shootings. I do want to tie those things together in our country. And for me as a woman, for many women, moms, how does that play out in our lives? For me personally, if you're a longtime listener of the program, you know that it's been about a year since I decided to really seriously dig into this deeply. And it opened my eyes. It changed my life. I would actually go so far as to say that. And the country that I grew up in and the country that I'm now raising my children in are, I feel, different. And growing up 30 years ago, the threats were there, but probably more covert. Today, I feel they're very much more overt, just in vulnerable people, openly targeted individuals, soft targets. We hear that. Malls, amusement parks, now concerts. And so for me, working as a news anchor, especially in the Cleveland area, seeing the headlines, finding out about violent crimes that occurred every day, that was the tipping point for me. But then, so I would say it's more protection than recreation that I got into it. But then I felt on a moral standpoint that it was important to be able to defend. Is my life not worth protecting, the lives of my children? And the answer is yes, of course. So it wasn't just going to the gun range, but learning about Cooper's rules of gun safety, the parts of a gun, calibers, don't say gun clip, it's a magazine, the whole culture that goes with it. But again, all about safety, all about the responsibility. And a huge part of that journey for me was a podcast that I found, and it's called the Concealed Carry Podcast with Riley T. Bowman, Jacob Paulsen, fantastic hosts, and covering everything from legislation to basic tips, great guests. So really honored as we tackle this topic today to welcome one of the hosts of the program. Jacob Paulsen is joining me. Hi, Jacob.
Hello, Brooke. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being on the show. And I really mean that. I feel like you are my pistol professors and, in a digital way, in a virtual way, have taught me a lot because I am busy. I don't have time, although I would like to go to the range and take classes and do online courses. But you and Riley, I think, are such great experts to speak, even though you know so much, into the lives of everyday laymen and women that are just out there trying to figure it out. And so I want to share a little bit about your story and experience. How did you enter into this world of firearms?
Yeah, so the most accurate answer is there was a time when I owned a private security business, and in that business we had to pay third-party companies to come in and train our employees, our security officers, and it became very costly and expensive. So I eventually became certified to do all that training and instruction myself. And when the security business went under in early 2007, I basically said, hey, I'll start a new company where we just focus on the training aspect because I now have those credentials. And that has grown into concealedcarry.com, which is what we have today, a media company, a company that provides tools and resources. And we have about 50 instructors in about 24 states that provide in-person training.
And you're one of them. You are an instructor. I failed to mention that, but you've done that for at least 10 years.
Yep. About a decade now teaching. I've had, 5,000 to 6,000 students through those classes. And yeah, this is something everyone in our company practices, what we preach, so to speak.
Well, and you've seen a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about women because females are the fastest demographic of gun owners. And this is according to numerous polls, CNN, Pew, and I just pulled up one stat that said nearly 1 in 4 women in the United States carries a gun, which is an increase of 77% in the last 5 years, which is huge. Why do you think that is, and does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I think that we have to remember that while it's the fastest growing demographic, it still technically represents a smaller percentage, a smaller piece of the total industry. So good to see the fast growth, but women still are a smaller demographic in the gun buying world. But that's going to change if this growth keeps up, right? Which is what we want to see. And I think this is why it doesn't surprise me. What we're seeing over the last 5 to 10 years is guns are changing in the mind of the American citizen from a tool for hunting or a tool for recreation to being a tool for personal protection. So while any given consumer, female or otherwise, might have said, I don't have an interest in hunting or I don't have an interest in recreational shooting, we're all coming to this realization that we have to take our own protection into our own hands. That the police, as awesome as they may be, they're generally 20 minutes out. So we have to be proactive. And I think that women are taking responsibility, just like a lot of people are. And you see that among men too. Frankly, you have the hunters who are now saying, hey, maybe I should have guns also for personal protection. So I think it's just a general movement toward personal protection, and women are part of that.
Well, and I want to park there too, because not just men and women, but also, like you said, where you happen to live. Is the culture different in the inner city? I have girlfriends of color who say they don't let their kids, their boys, play with guns because it is different. They're afraid, and they themselves have a much different, it's violent crime that they have an understanding of firearms. So they don't want to have anything to do with it. Yet, when I was at my CCW class, I was surprised at the number of women of color there. It was dominant, I would say, in just my little anecdotal survey that I did, just counting. But does that surprise you? I had seen that more Black women are getting their CCW permit. They are carrying. And why do you think that is? Is it to defend themselves?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, mostly because I'm on the front lines. Maybe it would surprise a consumer, but I'm in the business, so to speak. So we've seen that for a while, and it's true that in the inner city, and this is not just an issue of population in the U.S., but also ethnicity. So you have, for example, Latinos, which now represent a massive population shift here. 50 million of the 350 million, American citizens are Latino in origin. So some ethnicities of people or some cultures in terms of where you live, it has created a stigma where guns are associated with criminal behavior. Right? Only criminals have guns. Criminals and cops have guns. And so any association with a gun is negative. And that's why those people, whether it's because of their culture in terms of where their family is from, or just because of where they live and where they've been raised, that creates an entirely different culture around guns that has a negative stigma. So yeah, it's taken longer for those people to, I think, come around, so to speak, to this idea that, guns are a necessary tool if I want to protect me and my family.
Well, and you talk about the demographics changing and shifting, and also the stigmas. And you mentioned that a little bit about violent crime, but you've got, on one hand, the gun grabbers, we'll call them. On the other hand, the rednecks, we'll call them. And I'm just using stereotypes that are commonly thrown out there. But really, this does transcend any blue or red, or in terms of political party, or I would even say faith affiliation, which is the program. My podcast is all about faith. And so that is a component that I think has played in, at least for me, living an authentic Christian witness. And is it mutually exclusive to be a Christian and to carry a firearm? Now, I want to ask you, someone asked me this question. I know how I answered, but I want to know how you would answer. They said, how could you be pro-life and support the Second Amendment, own a firearm, support those who sell the ammo? I know what I said, but I would love to know how you would answer that.
Yeah, the answer is that guns save lives. So being pro-gun is being pro-life, is in my perspective, and that's an argument that we can have, but that is certainly the perspective of the gun owner who has a gun for self-defense. It's about being pro-life. On our podcast every Monday, we report on about a half dozen news stories from the previous 7 days of people using a gun in their own self-defense. So I would ask, anyone who asked me that question, say, well, then what is it in this case? Where this gun saved lives, whether a round was fired or not, whether a criminal had to die or not, the gun was a tool used to save life. So doesn't that make it a pro-life tool if used properly by responsible people?
Well, it's interesting. I actually happen to be Catholic, so I went to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it was actually laid out in there. It's legitimate self-defense. Obviously, it's a different story. Every scenario has to be individually analyzed and discerned, but the idea, like you said, that if I have children, and we are in a country now, if we could wipe out every gun in the face of the earth, well, that might be an option, but we can't. And so to, as citizens, be able to protect our families, I think it is important. And I think it's one thing to have it, but to actually use it. I want to ask you about the fear issue, because I've talked to a lot of moms and ladies who have said, I could train, I could go to the range, I could learn, but I could never pull the trigger and eliminate a threat. So how does fear play in?
Well, frankly, I think they're wrong. I think that's not true. I've taught a lot of classes. In fact, not last year, I taught a class to a group of pastors, kind of a non-denominational group of pastors, different Christian faiths. And there were a few of them who raised their hand and said something to the effect of, I'm good with dying. Like I'm totally okay, meeting my maker tomorrow. And I think that's a very amazing kind of amount of self-introspection. But they also said, what I'm not okay with is the blood of my flock being on my hands. So I'm willing to step in and do what's necessary to defend these people who look to me to protect them. And I got no problem going to my maker. That's fine. But it is also my job to protect my flock. And I think when I hear people say, hey, I could never pull a trigger, I could never shoot someone, I think, yeah, you could. No, you're wrong. It's just not true. If the circumstances were right, you could. The instinct, the innate human instinct of survival is extraordinarily powerful. And, thinking about moms specifically, like I have a hard time believing that you could sit there and watch someone rape your child or kidnap them and you would not have the ability to pull a trigger.
Right.
I think that's a lie. I don't think that's true. And so I think that this comes down to really understanding what the tool is for. And if we understand what the tool is for, then maybe it helps us kind of overcome this idea that I could not use that tool in those circumstances, because you could.
You mentioned pastors, and so I wanted to ask about churches because that is the triangle of my life. It's home, school, and church. And whether I'm speaking, I go into churches, and that's where, because whether you're in scouts or groups where we just happen to be a lot. And I know you find a church and you'll find a different philosophy about this. You do have churches that have the big no gun signs. You have others where there probably are armed parishioners. What are you seeing in terms of your connection with the church and how pastors are feeling overall about this?
Yeah, church, this is a new thing. There's an entire industry exploding right now in this country surrounding church security. So churches are getting on board with this idea that they need people to protect them. Last year I had my research team go out and build me a spreadsheet with a list of news stories over the previous 10 years of violent crimes taking places in churches or on church property across this country. And that spreadsheet is very long. It is extensive. The number of violent crimes that take place in churches or on church property would surprise you. It is scary. And so churches are getting on board with this idea, whether it's the priest, the bishop, the pastor, the reverend, whoever it is. People are coming to understand that when someone comes into your building, they want to feel a sense of security and safety. And frankly, they deserve it. And when we're seeing, the right to worship under attack, not only by the government, but also by shooters, by deranged lunatics, that means we have to do something to protect ourselves. And so there's an entire industry out there, that's growing just around the idea of training churches to help them build security protocols, security plans, and security teams. And sometimes, in a lot of churches, that's real simple. It's a pastor who's going to get 2 or 3 volunteers and say, hey, will you guys go and get your concealed carry permits and, sit in the back row on Sundays? And that might be as far as it goes. For others, it's much more ornate. I've done training with churches where you'd be impressed. It is pretty, they have security teams that are better prepared and better trained than most police departments.
It's interesting because in my own church, there's a firefighter and there's another man who does security all over the world. And between those three, my husband and these 2 other men, they do create a triangle in the church and they have the exits covered. There's a balcony. So we always know that there are those sheepdogs among us, and they might be dressed in suits and ties, but they are in some ways our guardians. But I think the average mom just trying to figure out how she's going to wrangle her kids and get them in the door, should she be thinking about that? Should this be left to the men, or is it all of us as individual citizens being vigilant?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here to understand. The first one is that while the kind of the mass shootings of this nation are the things that get all the media attention and often kind of build all the emotion that leads us to action, they're not the most common thing among which we have to defend ourselves from. So we have to stop connecting the idea of being a gun owner and carrying it around with the premise that I'm going to be in a movie theater and someone's going to come in and shoot 30 people, because the odds of that are extremely low. The more truth, the real reality is probably going to be that I'm going to be in my home and someone's going to break in and they're going to have malintentions. So I'm going to have to do something about it. That's reality. That's true. And so while, we can all sit here and say, hey, it is possible that I'd be sitting in church in Tennessee 3 weeks ago and someone comes in and starts shooting people. That happened. And so, someone needs to be able to do something. but that's not the normal day-to-day reason why most people carry a gun. It's for the more common situations, where the mom was in Walmart 2 weeks ago and her daughter gets into a fist fight with someone and it starts to get bloody. And so she decides, like, this is going bad. I might have to defend my own daughter in a Walmart. Those are probably more likely than me being in Las Vegas when someone opens fire and shoots 500 people. So that's the first thing to consider. The second is that we unfortunately have this stigma with guns and concealed carry that's connected to heroism. And I can tell you right now, I'm not a hero. And I have no qualms about saying that. Like, if I'm in a gas station and someone's going to shoot the guy at the front counter, I will hide behind the noodles in the back row. Like, I have no problem going home and continuing to be a father and letting that man die. It's just not an issue for me because my kids deserve a dad. And so I would encourage you, if you're thinking about this, that you have to remember your job is not to go out and save society from bad guys and bad gals. Your job is to protect you and your family. That's your number one. And so you need to say, well, what if that's all I have to do? That's not that intimidating. And having a gun with me all the time then is a necessity if that's my objective, because I can't trust anybody else to protect me and these people next to me. That's my job. And that's what I'm going to do.
One of the things I do think bears mentioning is when I started to carry my firearm, I drastically changed my smartphone habits because I did recognize that I was always looking at my phone. And when I had my firearm, I felt like I need to be alert and know what's going on around me, that situational awareness. And it was interesting to me because I could see, as I reflected back, how often I just wasn't aware of the issue. Yeah, I mean, the person next to me pumping gas, for instance. And so how much does that play in? Do you see that a lot where people are just kind of checked out?
Yes, I don't know how significant an issue it is. I think that there's a lot of other unrelated benefits to just paying attention to your world beyond just, seeing the threat coming.
Right.
So I would say, hey, if the gun is the thing that allows us to have increased situational awareness, awesome. And while that's very important for the purpose of self-defense, there's a myriad of other great benefits that come from just opening your eyes and seeing the world that's around us and the beauty that God has created, right? So I would go so far as to say that, yes, that's important and that's an awesome byproduct, but it's probably not the greatest benefit that comes from just setting down the device and opening your eyes.
Well, and your show and the Justified segment that you have has opened my eyes. I think the scenarios that play out that unfortunately are real, they have happened, but they teach great lessons, has really helped me see that it's not going to be A, B, and you're going to get C. And all these threats do come in different ways. Hopefully, God willing, we'll never have to deal with it. But you talked about hiding behind the noodles. Is it instinct? When do we know, okay, I just need to call 911 here, or I need to actually deploy my weapon and eliminate this threat? Is it when that person's coming for you directly, or is it different in every scenario?
I think that to believe we can really pre-plan it is a little bit naive and foolish. I think that we need some guiding ethical principles, and if those principles live deep enough and we know what they are, then that will be how we'll react whether we like it or not. So the better question is to say, what am I really willing to risk my life for? What am I willing to kill for? And the answers to those questions, which are somewhat individual and personal, they live pretty deep inside of you. And so if you really have a strong grasp on those answers and you're comfortable with the answers to those questions, then know that you'll act on that regardless. That will be the most natural, instinctive thing that you're going to do. It takes a lot of work to train our law enforcement officers and our military to run toward gunfire. It's not natural. So, just know that instinctively you're probably going to do the best thing regardless. A little bit of training goes a long way, but the key, what we're really training people for, is so that when they engage, they do it to maximize a positive outcome. But when and how you're going to engage is pretty instinctive and not something that needs or requires a great deal of direction.
Where would you recommend a woman start if maybe she doesn't have a gun? I know that was, to me, overwhelming in the beginning. It's like, okay, there are a million. Is it Glock? Is it SIG? Is it Smith & Wesson? I don't even know. And then I actually went to the local gun store and I felt like the guy was laughing at me, and maybe he was. But then I just felt like I don't even want to enter into this because it's way over my head. And so for me, it was actually going to YouTube and doing things in my own home where I learned, okay, this is the barrel, this is the slide, and the very basics. And then men going out, but for somebody who really doesn't have any experience, like myself, I mean, my husband did and does, but where would you suggest starting?
I'm a graduate of the University of YouTube, so I would highly encourage people to get enrolled today. It's free. So here's some thoughts. One, women don't want to be treated different than men until you want to be treated different than men, and men have no idea when that is. So don't ever go out and say what's the best gun for women, because it has nothing to do with being a woman. It has to do with maybe size of hands, and maybe traditionally women have smaller hands or something, but that's really irrelevant. Here would be a couple thoughts that are actually tangibly really helpful. Number one would be, don't go to gun store, go to friends who have guns. You know how often me and my wife go shooting together? Every time someone asks us to go with them. Anytime me and my wife are at the range together, it's a double date. And that happens pretty darn regularly because inevitably either one of my friends is going to come to me and say, hey, let's go shooting together. And I'm be like, I'm a busy dude. If you want that to happen, you're going to have to convince your wife to convince my wife, and all four of us will go. Or it's the opposite. It's one of my wife's friends coming to her and saying, hey, I'd like to learn to shoot or do this shooting thing. Like, what do we do? And my wife's like, yeah, double date. Grab your husband. We'll roll. And that's an extremely effective methodology. And even if you didn't go with that other couple, the point is go get somebody who's familiar with guns and owns a ton of them and just go to the range with them and shoot with them. Their opinions on those guns are far more validated than the gun salesman because that person owns the guns and knows everything about them, has shot them. And there's nothing better than just getting a bunch of guns in your hand and shooting them all. And you can't do that at most gun stores. Even if you could, it's going to be very expensive. You're going to have to pay rental fees. You have to buy the ammo from them. It's going to be crazy. And you're not going to get good input because this person is a gun salesman and has an incentive to get rid of guns. So finding the friend, that one person in your circle who owns a ton of guns and asking them to take you to the range and bring all of them and let you try them all is your number one. Here's the second piece of legit, like really good, actual solid advice. Just buy something. We put way too much effort and emphasis into picking the right gun. And this is one of those situations in life when making a decision is more important than making the best decision. Because for one, guns have extremely high resale value. So if you buy the wrong gun, which you're so afraid to do, don't stress it. You'll turn around, you'll sell it tomorrow, and you'll probably turn a profit. So it's not a big deal. It's like real estate, classic cars, and old stamps. Take good care of it, and it will make you money. So don't worry so much about finding the perfect gun. Just buy one. And if you hate it, sell it, get another one. It's not going to be a problem. One more important is that you just have one so you can start to shoot it and develop a sense for what you like and don't like about it.
And I think those are fantastic tips. For myself, I had a Derringer, which is just because I thought it would be something I could manage not having any gun experience. And my husband was like, are you sure? Because for those that don't know, this would be the gun that like the saloon ladies would wear back in the day. But that's where I had to start for me. And my husband saying, you're not probably going to do any damage unless someone is like right there. But it was a process for me. So
yeah, and just start somewhere is the point. Like don't drag out the decision because you're afraid of screwing up. Just shoot something. Like go get a gun and shoot it. Well, and you'll quickly learn you hate it or love it.
And I think, too, to be true to who you are, I have to say that when I kind of entered into the gun culture, it frustrated me a little bit because there's, I guess, like anything that is in some ways testosterone driven. Like on Instagram, for instance, there was a lot of women half dressed and they're holding these big guns. And I thought, I don't want to be a part of that. I'm just, I'm someone that I want to be responsible. I want to be classy. I want to do what I need to do. And so I think like anything, you can glorify things and be extreme about it. And people can give guns a bad name. But that's what I love about your program is you really do a good job of the education. So if people don't know, how can they catch your show?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find our show in any podcast catcher app thingy, iTunes, whatever, just search Concealed Carry Podcast. It'll be the number one result. And I think we're on episode 164 or so right now. So I'd encourage you to subscribe and then go back and just review past titles, look for things that pop out to you that sound interesting, and listen to those. And, a lot of these podcast apps now will let you like increase playback speed. So you can go through an hour worth of content in 30 minutes and get the nuts and bolts very quickly. So that's the easiest way to find us. But our website is also concealedcarry.com. Very easy to remember.
And you do a great job of your show notes. And I love, again, you cover legislation, you cover cold weather carry tips. You have great guests on your program. The one I really liked, too, was when you did your EDC bag. And that's, which I forgot I wanted to ask you, too. So maybe that'll be our last takeaway question for self-defense for women. women, what should the average mom be carrying on her person on a daily basis? Maybe she's saying, I've listened to this entire interview. I'm not ready for a firearm. I don't remember if it was you or Riley that said a tourniquet. Every day they carry a tourniquet. Any just basic top 3, top 5 things?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hard question. The answer is you should be carrying as much as you can comfortably carry every day to be as effective as possible. But you have to start somewhere. I had a friend who did what they called the 30-day knife challenge, and they weren't ready for a gun, so they just got a really decent pocket knife and they carried it for 30 days. And to them, that really helped them then transition to start carrying around a gun. Now, to another person, that might sound like it doesn't work. But maybe it's mace, maybe it's pepper spray, maybe it's whatever it might be. But the point is start with something and then work your way up. And even with a gun, we deal with that all the time. We got some people who are carrying the Derringer or the 5-shot, whatever, and we're constantly trying to help people try and get something that's bigger or holds more ammunition or whatever it might be. You can always do better, and I can do better too, but we have to get to the point where we're comfortable, because the number one most important takeaway from this question is something is better than nothing. The worst thing you can do is say it's too uncomfortable, it's too inconvenient, or I don't feel comfortable with that yet, for whatever other reason, so I'm going to leave it home. That's your number one do not do. So something is always better than nothing, whether some gun is better than, the better gun, or, pepper spray is better than nothing, or mace is better, something is better than nothing. So you have to have something with you. I mean, think about it. If you're listening to this and you're a mom, like, you have Band-Aids, in your purse. You have all sorts of ridiculous things that you rarely need because you're a mom. Like, awesome. Like, how hard is it to add pepper spray to that, or mace, or a decent knife? And then as you get more and more comfortable, work your way up. And comfort will come, by the way, only with training, experience, and practice. Nothing else will bring that.
So you do say to start with that, and then any 2 top more that you would add?
I think a knife is paramount.
Okay.
I think knives are just so multi-use purpose awesomeness. You should always have a knife. I think cash is another one that I think we neglect in a world of plastic. Having some cash hidden away somewhere that's not in a wallet that you can access on the fly is huge, 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 huge. And the third I would say is sound. So sound is usually a whistle. Whistles can be very effective. I mean, you need to be able to draw attention quickly when necessary. Here's an interesting idea. I actually in the process of reviewing this product from this company called Yellow Jacket, and they make a case for a cell phone that looks like you've kind of attached an external battery, but it's actually a taser. So you push a button on that sucker, you hit someone with your phone, and boom, they'll drop to the ground.
Jacob,
so it's
but look, I mean, this
cool.
is the stuff that scares me, though, because as a mom, my kids are grabbing my phone, and I'm afraid they're going to tase
right? somebody.
So I guess you just case
each
by
their
case.
own, right? It may not be a good product for someone who has young children, but it does. I mean, there are some safety, things built into that. You have to push this, then push that, then touch this. So it's not the kind of thing that could go off on accident most of the time. But it's like anything else in life. If you're a mom, you just get this. You got to childproof things.
Right.
You childproof the outlets in the wall. You got to childproof the guns. You got to childproof the mace and the pepper spray. Everything needs to be childproofed. And so there's always a way to do things that is good, safe, and correct. It sometimes just requires changing habits or creating different muscle memory, which is challenging but important for all of those things.
And what about flashlight? Would you add that to the list?
Yeah, flashlights are huge. An easy one, this is a flashlight that I'm pretty obsessed with, is the Streamlight Micro Stream. It's like $15-20 on Amazon, and it's tiny. It runs on a single AAA battery. It's 60 lumens, and it just works. Flashlights are amazing. You can take them anywhere. You can even have them on airplanes. They're amazing striker tools. You hit someone with a flashlight, it's going to be very effective. And sometimes you're in the dark and you need light too. So flashlights are amazing tools. Have a flashlight.
That's great. All really fantastic information. Thank you for your time. I'm excited, too, because in addition to your fantastic show, you're launching one for women, I understand.
Yeah, correct. It'll be later this year, and the 2 hosts are not me and Riley. They're actually like women, and they're very modern, women who understand guns, not from kind of the old school redneck, point of view, but from kind of the modern woman, like, hey, I'm still a woman who does woman things, dresses in a woman way, but I choose to be armed and to be prepared. And that'll be launching later this quarter, before the end of the year, and it'll be called Not Your Average Gun Girls Podcast.
Great. All right, we'll follow up on that. And when you talk about practicing and using, another plug I wanted to offer was for the concealedcarry.com store, because from the holsters that you make to the purse, the handbags, I think you do offer everything for every stage of self-defense. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, does that help? Did you get what you needed?
Okay. Yes, that absolutely. And I'm sure it'll need a little bit of editing, but overall, that was really, really good. And it's
Good.
hard because there's so many different avenues that we could go down. We really didn't get a chance to talk about Las Vegas and what is it about these mass shooters that they have in common. I mean, just all those kind of soul searching questions. But I
Yeah.
think for the basics, it was fantastic.
And maybe when you do your intro outro, when you put this in the